Okay, we can begin. Today we will go through most of what we need to do for leasing. That's the first of the last two units, which we will cover. The final one being analyzing mergers. Little introduction. The distinction between capital and operating leases has diminished over time. The intent of the capital lease is for financing capital assets, and that would be long-term assets that generate your cash flows. Operating leases were for relatively smaller equipment, at least not your major capital, your major capital assets. When I first started teaching Finance 420, that's corporate valuation, I had the class complete valuations of casual dining restaurants. The intent was to have them value companies in which they could actually, they've actually participated in, they've made purchases there. Anyway, so we read through the 10Ks and soon discovered that I believe it was all the companies that we had, companies that we had chosen to value, we're leasing their buildings. And you've been in one of these restaurants. That's a major component of the business is the building. They undoubtedly lease more than that, some equipment, I'm sure. But in any case, they were all structured as operating leases. And the difficulty when it comes to valuing the company is that the operating leases were not at that time shown on the balance sheet. Right? So what we had to do is we found the lease obligations, and based on the obligations, and they were called, the rentals, we created and added a leased asset entry to the balance sheet on the left side, along with an offsetting lease liability entry to the long-term debt. So right below their formal long-term debt, and most of them didn't have any actually, we included an entry for the lease liability. So just at the time when the Financial Accounting Standards Board decided to require that the operating leases be shown on the balance sheet, I found this article in Real Money. It said that operating leases, however, were an asset as viewed as simply being rented and ownership was not transferred, were not included in the balance sheet as an asset or liability. And that's what we found. Data on these leases was off the books, but included in the notes in the financial statements. Often analysts, not often, any analyst that was doing a thorough job would scour the notes, capitalize these operating leases in order to include them in the company's long-term liabilities as debt. So when you hear the word capitalize, What does that mean? Explain it to an eighth grader participating in junior achievement. Well, to capitalize a stream of cash flows is to find the present value of those cash flows, and in this case, obligations, these payments, and we will create a liability, just like a bond. So we value a bond as the present value of all the payments the bond will make. In the same way, we capitalize or create a liability, a capital liability associated with the lease payments. Right? And then again, we offset it on the left side of the balance sheet with something we call the leased asset. Okay. So the Financial Accounting Standards Board, accounting standard, and here you got it, ASU 2016-2, which addresses these changes, will be enforced for fiscal years beginning December 31st or December 15th, 2018, although companies were permitted to adopt the change early. Now, the early adopters were those which had essentially relatively small amounts of operating leases. Now take those with large operating leases. McDonald's, for instance, reported a huge increase in total assets from 32.8 billion at the end of year 2018 to 46.5 billion at the end of the first quarter 2019, and liabilities from 39 billion to 53 billion to account for the operating leases. And I'd like to take a small pause and offer my sympathies for those of you who are double majors, with that second major being accounting. And if you've had to learn how to capitalize these leases, good luck. It's not terribly fun. But anyway, that's not what we're doing here. What we will be doing is we should be able to answer three questions. What is the NPV of a lease? What is the minimum payment that a lessor, and that's the company writing or offering the lease, will be willing to accept? And what is the maximum payment that a lessee, the company that accepts the lease and makes the payments, should be willing to make? When you make your rent payments, you have a lease. And I worked for I didn't work for them, but I did some work with a leasing company out of Eau Claire. And the day that I was working with the principals in the company, they were writing leases for shrimp boats out of Louisiana. So it's interesting that a company out of Eau Claire would write a shrimp boat lease out of Louisiana. But anyway, they did. And they made the distinction, anything under a year, they called it rent. And anything beyond a year, they were called lease payments. So it's kind of, in the leasing business, that's what they do. Now I realize that you pretty much call your rent payments, even though, and that's correct. And you don't write, I don't know, maybe some of you write it more than a 1-year lease, but I think typically you don't on your residencies. So this is the basis for what we'll be doing. We will view a lease as an alternative to borrowing and buying an asset. Leasing is absolutely nothing that should generate a fear in you. I leased a car once, and it was the right thing to do. And if for example, an automotive company dealership has a car that isn't moving very rapidly, they might offer a very, very fine lease on it. And that's what I was able to find. I had a colleague who wanted a pickup truck, and the pickup trucks were priced very high. but he found a lease. Now, this particular pickup truck happened to be one of the ugliest greens I think I've ever seen, but it didn't bother him a bit, and he was able to lease it for an amount that was well below any payment he would have made associated with ownership. So, if you don't mind, an automobile which isn't perhaps your first choice, but is somewhat slow moving, you could write a lease that might be very, very attractive. All right. So it's an alternative to a loan and buying the asset. So from the perspective of the lessee, if a lease has a negative NPV, the company is better off borrowing at the cost of debt and purchasing the asset. A positive NPV, then the company should accept the lease. The borrowing rate for leasing would actually be a little bit lower than RD if you can find it. It's sometimes hard to find on a 10K, but obviously if you have a collateralized loan, the cost is lower than one which has no collateral. So the lease asset itself serves as the collateral for the lease or for the loan. In other words, if you were to purchase this asset, then the asset itself would be the collateral for the loan. Therefore, the collateralized rate is typically lower than the straight debt rate. But I won't, that's not part of what we're doing. If this were a case course and you had to read through 10Ks, then that's what you'd be looking for. But we'll just get a discount rate and we'll work with it. You won't have to be searching for that. Okay, then the lessor, on the other hand, a negative NPV, the company should not write or offer the lease. And if it's a positive NPV, then the lessor should be willing to write it. All right, let's continue here. I have an example. Now, the Chen company has the opportunity to lease equipment that costs $500 for 6 annual payments made at the beginning of the year of $120. Leasing is an alternative to borrowing and buying. If Chen were to borrow and purchase the asset, the borrowing rate would be 12%. The tax rate is 25%. The asset falls into the MACRS 3-year class. And these are the factors. They're slightly different than what you'd find in an accounting book, but let's just use mine. So we'll evaluate this lease from both perspectives, the lessee and the lessor. All right, so let's start from the perspective of the lessee. And I'll explain all of this as we go along. So let's take this table and drop it into Excel. So I will, let's open a new sheet. Okay, so I'll drop this into Excel. And of course I have my own format I like better, so I always paste to the destination format. And I'll open this up and we'll make this larger so you can see it a little better. All right. And I'm going to add one more row if you don't mind. It's not entirely necessary, but we know the lease payment at this point for the lessor, and for this particular lease, it'd be both sides, it'd be the lessee, it'd be $120. And let's just get complete about this. Let's do another one. And let's do a number of payments. This will be a 6-payment lease. All right, I think that's what we need to know. All right, we need a discount rate. And the discount rate is always the after-tax cost of an equivalent loan. So in other words, you have to convert the borrowing rate to an after-tax rate. And how do we do that? As we've done all semester, it's just the before tax, whatever it is, cash flow rate, whatever it might be before tax, times 1 minus T. So I come down here, my borrowing rate is equal to 12% times 1 minus the tax rate. All right, and just so you know, all right, there you go. So 1 minus 25%. Okay, we have $120 payment. We have 6 payments. Oh, hang on a minute. We've already put a 6 here, right? Oh, not at all. Why? Because the payments are made at the beginning of the period, aren't they? They're made at the beginning of the period. So therefore, the first payment is immediate. The last payment is the sixth payment is at the beginning of year 6, which is the end of year 5. So that's why in here we will show 1 less year than you have payments. All right. So let's start out. If you lease, you avoid purchasing the asset. Therefore, you save money initially equal to the cost of the asset. So we'll be saving, if we lease this asset, you don't have to buy it. So initially you save $500. Right? But because as a lessee, you do not have ownership of the asset, you forego the depreciation tax shields. So you will not be depreciating the asset since you don't have ownership. Alternatively, if you were to have purchased this asset, you would have ownership and you would have the tax shields. So they become what's called an opportunity cost of leasing. Right? So we'll calculate the depreciation on this. And we're going to say equals 33% the first year times the value of the asset. And we'll, of course, lock that. Then the depreciation tax shield. The depreciation tax shield is just equal to the tax rate times depreciation. You might recall from chapter 6, we had the revenues minus cost times 1 minus T plus T times depreciation. That was the depreciation tax shield. So we're going to say equals the tax rate, and you will lock that, times the amount of depreciation. That would be here. And now let's make this sign correct. You want to do that? Let's make this sign correct. So this is a opportunity cost associated with leasing the asset. So we're going to put a minus sign in front of that. Okay, and then let's enter our lease payments. Of course, those will be negative, and we will lock that. All right, again, the first payment is made immediately. All right, and the lease payment itself is tax deductible. It's tax deductible. So therefore, on an after-tax basis, it would be the lease payment minus the tax shield from expensing the lease payment. So let's do that. That would equal the 120 times, I'm lighting up. Hang on a minute, what am I doing here? Can you show the depreciation tax yield again? I can do that. Oops, I was just trying to get out of this. Okay, yeah. Okay, hang on. Okay, show the depreciation tax yield again. Yeah. Again, it's an opportunity cost. So I'm starting with the minus. And I'm multiplying the depreciation value itself times the tax rate. And we'll make sure we lock the tax rate because we will soon be copying the cell all the way across. Are we okay on that? Let me make sure. All right, good. Good time to catch all these things. It's somewhat disturbing to me if around 1:30 someone says, how'd you get that first thing? Well, you know what? Let's get it now. Okay. And then the tax yield would be equal to the lease payment. So if I could deduct $120 and my tax rate were 25%, how much would that save me in taxes? Well, times T. Lock it. So you'll save $30 on your taxes. That's a positive cash flow, isn't it? Okay, so our leasing cash flows, let's do a auto sum. That's everything the first year. Year zero, forgive me, everything immediately. Okay, and then over here, what do we get? Okay, well, these will go all the way across. These will go all the way across. But then, of course, when we set up the cash flow, we don't go all the way up to the top as we did here. So I can't just copy this. I would just copy these three items. So we would come down here and we will do an auto sum and capture these last three items. Okay, now we're in position to run this all the way across. And as you can see, the last payment, the last cash flow is just the lease payment because there is no more depreciation. Oh, wow, what did I do wrong? Oh, I got lock C11, don't I? No, I don't. What's going on here? Oh, I didn't do this. So sorry. My fault. Fell asleep. There we go. If you're about to tell me what I did wrong, I appreciate that. But yes, you have to copy these depreciations across. And now I'm fine, I hope. All right. Anyway, one way or the other, we have to get all of these numbers. So the cash flows for years one through N would be the depreciation opportunity cost, the lease payment, and the lease payment's tax shield. So these are the cash flows, not the payments, the cash flows from the lease decision, the decision to lease. Now we'll do an NPV. All right, and this is no different than any other NPV we've done throughout the semester. So we'll use the NPV function, net present value. Okay, we'll get our rate right here. Oh, right here. Don't do that. Here, I'm telling you not to use 12%, and I was about to do it. All right, get your rate. Uh-oh, I've got it. I'm lit up here. What's going on here? What do we have here? The equation for C15. All right, let me get back. I'll go back to that in a minute. So we take all of these, and then we will add back the initial cash flow zero, since NPV function does not include cash flow zero. How did I do? I did very well, except for the flaming formatting. I don't know why it has to do that. Oh, that's good. Yeah, okay, let's go back to, I believe it was C15. it's just the sum of these, of the depreciation tax shield, the lease payment, and the lease tax shield. Is that okay? Oh, good, good. Thank you, thank you. Very good. Anything else we can do? So based on the beginning of what I was saying earlier, if you were the lessee, you were on the lessee side of this lease. Of course, there's always two sides, right? The lessor and the lessee. Should you be leasing this asset? Should you be leasing this asset? And what you can conclusively say is, I would be better off borrowing at 12% and purchasing this asset than I would be making 6 payments of $120. Does that make sense? And that's what I know right now. Okay. All right. So this is, why did I go through this? This, excuse me. I'm hoping that most of you don't do it this way, but this is the way it's done in your text. They develop the lease cash flows, and they take the NPV of the lease cash flows, all right? Is there anything wrong with doing it like this? Absolutely not. But we have another question. We have another, or actually 2 more questions to ask. And this is not a terribly useful way to answer those questions. And the questions are, what's the largest payment that the lessee should be willing to make? And what is the minimum payment that the lessor should be willing to make? This format does not create a situation where we can readily answer that question. So we're going to change formats, and we will arrive at this exact same answer, but we're going to do it just a little bit differently. And here we go. So let's start out with the initial savings, and that doesn't change. All right, then the next thing will be the present value of the depreciation factors. All right, well, let me show you something. What happened? Let's go back to this first cash flow. What's in this cash flow? We have a negative 90 after tax for the lease payment, and we have a negative 41.25 embedded for the opportunity cost of the lost depreciation. Okay, so let's just track these depreciations. Can you see that these cash flow numbers include these depreciations, don't they? Right, so how did we do it? You don't need to write this down. Just follow my logic, if you would, please. We have, excuse me, we have $500 cost of the asset times our first factor times the tax rate. In this case, it was 25%. All right, now when I move this to the second factor, what changes? Well, the 500 is still there. The 25 is still there, except we will take 45, won't we? 0.45. And how's this change for the third? We'll change this to 1.5. How's this change for the last one? Oh, my fault. Go back. Don't make an error. Oh, I don't know what happened. Anyway, and find the last one. Well, 07. All right, that's our factors. What I hope you see is that the 500 and the 2.5, the tax rate, are common to each of those 4 terms. So if I just wanted to find the present value of the depreciation tax shields, how would I do it, separate from all those other cash flows? Well, I would multiply, I wouldn't do it that way. It would equal $500 times the parts that are in common, the 25%. So the tax shield, I'm sorry, the cost of the asset times the tax rate, and then times, and what we'll do is we'll take the present value of the depreciation factors. That's what we'll be doing, all right? Oops, don't need two S's there. So anyway, let's just do that. Okay. How does column get so wide? I don't know. Anyway, so let's do that. So we're going to say equals NPV, correct rate, always the after-tax cost of an equivalent loan. So in this case, 9%. Okay, comma. And then we will highlight the factors. Okay. Now what I'd like you to do is anytime you do this, use 4 decimal places. Display 4 decimal places. Now, even if you don't display them, Excel will keep them. It has way more than that. But I'd like you to at least show 4 places, all right? Then we'll take the present value of depreciation tax shields. Okay, so that would equal. Okay, we're gonna make it sign correct because this is an opportunity cost. So minus the 500 times the tax rate, 25%, times the present value of the factors. All right. Now you might be thinking, well, what's so much better about that than this? Well, do you see this? This is a 3-year class asset. You have a couple of questions in your assignment in which you have a 7-year class asset and 8 cash flows, and one has 10 cash flows. Okay, so if you set it up like this, you have a lot of work to do. We're here. What would I do here? I would just extend the factors to include all the factors. Everything else is pretty much the same. Okay, then we're going to create something, and this is the useful number. We're going to call something here the net cost. Oh, sorry. I'm ahead of myself. That's the lessor. Net savings. The net savings. So when I include the amount I initially saved and the lost tax shields, their present value, I actually have a net savings of $394.13. It starts out as if it's $500, but I've given up these depreciation tax shields. So what do you have here? Well, in effect, this would be in effect the NPV, or the present value of the decision to buy. Because what happens if you would have purchased this asset? You would have paid $500 initially, then over the next 4 years, you would have depreciated and seen these depreciation tax shields. Okay. So this is the present value of the buy decision. So what we need to know is the present value of the buy decision more or less than the present value of the lease decision? So now we'll do the present value essentially of the lease decision. So we're going to do the present value of the after tax. All right. So Oh, yeah, maybe I'll just make this a little bit bigger. Okay, so let's try it. Equals. Now we're going to use the PV function, not NPV, present value. All right. You want the rate. And boy, oh boy, I hope we have it starting to become a permanent part of your cognition, and that would be, it has to be the after-tax cost of an equivalent loan. So the after-tax borrowing rate, comma, number of periods. We have that up here, 6. And then the payment. Okay, now you got to remember, we want the after-tax, not the before-tax. This is before-tax. All right, and then we will multiply that times 1 minus the tax rate. All right. Okay, we have to continue. Is there a future value? There is not. So we could enter a 0, but that's not necessary. If you just simply enter a second comma, that will work. You don't have to have a 0 between those commas if you don't have a future value. All right, the next one is very important to include. The last argument is the type, and the type would be either at the beginning of the period or the end of the period. The default on this is 0, and the default being 0 indicates that this is an end of the period annuity. Well, in this particular case, we have a beginning of the period annuity, therefore we have to enter the argument. If it's an end of the period annuity, you don't have to do anything with it. But if it's a beginning of the period annuity, you have to specify beginning of the period. If you were doing this on your calculator, you'd have to indicate to your calculator this is an annuity due. Right? So once we have the 1 there, we're in good shape. And we get 440.07. So the NPV of the lease, is this the sum of these two? And let's sum these. And have we seen that number before? Oh, look at that. Exactly the same. All right, but what's nice about this? Why is this 95 or 45.93 more desirable than this one? Well, that's because we now are set such that we can readily find the maximum payment this lessee should be willing to make. And the maximum payment the lessee should be willing to make is the indifference value, such that the NPV of leasing is exactly equal to the NPV of borrowing and buying. Okay, so the maximum you should be willing to make is where you come out with exactly the same NPV as you would either leasing or borrowing and buying. Okay, we start that. Let's give ourselves a little label here. So this is the maximum payment lessee should be willing to make. Okay, so that's the next part of our analysis. Let's come down here. Maximum payment the lessee should be willing to make. So let's start out with the net savings. Okay. All right. We will convert that to an annuity. So this will be our after-tax payment. Right, so we will convert this number to a 6-year annuity. Okay, let's do that. So it equals payment rate, as always. The only error I'm making, if I do make an error, is I click on the wrong cell, but it should be the after-tax cost of an equivalent loan, the number of periods, that would be our N up here, that would be 6. Present value, okay, that would be the, actually we could take it from right here if you wanted to, but oh, it's okay. It would be the 394.13 number, and then no future value. And then we like these to be at the beginning of the period, so we'll specify the argument. Now this is an Excel function in which we do not have an embedded parentheses. Therefore, you don't need to add the right parentheses. Excel will do it for you. So I get 8061. That's the after-tax payment. Now, obviously, when you receive your the bill for your lease payment, it is on a before-tax basis, so we have to convert this back to before tax. Okay, and we can do that very easily. We'll take the after-tax payment. And how did we find an after-tax payment? We took the before tax multiplied by 1 minus t. So we'll just flip that process. This time we'll take the after-tax payment and divide by 1 minus t. So we're just reversing it. So what would this have been on a before tax basis? So 1 minus the tax rate of the lessee. And there is, oh, that is not correct. What have I done wrong? Oh, I've got to use the borrowing rate. Any bets? Of course. There we go. All right, there you go. 107.47. All right, so that is the maximum payment the lessee should be willing to make. No, I wouldn't say you would have time to do this on an exam, but can we verify that this is a good number? Well, I believe we can. If we came up here and you see this lease payment we have here, okay, right here. Okay, what if we set that equal to we display it as a positive number, so we have to flip the sign. So minus, and what did we say our lease payment minimum would be? 107.47. So if I enter that in here, and I come down to the NPV here, oh, look at that. That was, this is just a display issue. So let's do our format of our cells, and let's show 2 decimals, and let's do number 2 decimals. So that is 0. Okay, so that's the break-even point between leasing and buying. So that's the largest payment that this lessee should be willing to make. All right, if you want, you can change this back to 120, so so everything is following its logical conclusion. All right. Any questions so far? Let me take a deep breath and look over here. All right. Well, I hope we're following. All right. Now we will value this lease from the perspective of the lessor, so the leasing company. Now, leasing companies can be anything from an independent leasing company to a branch of a large financial institution. So typically their borrowing rates are lower than what a company can find, and their tax rates tend to be lower too. So but let's just use what we have in the problem. So we will lessor. Let's do the lessor this time. All right, and the analysis for the lessor is just think of a payment counter, and you're on one side of the counter, you're paying for whatever you're purchasing. Well, the representative on the other side of the counter is accepting your payment. And so there's two parties to the transaction, and what was a payment to you was a receipt to the representative on the other side of the counter. Well, it's the same thing here. So we start out here, everything's just the opposite. What the lessor or lessee saves initially, since the lessor will take ownership of this asset, the lessor has to purchase it. So instead of an initial savings, we're going to see just the opposite. It will be an initial cost. Okay. So we'll take a minus 500 on this. Now, do most leasing companies have this kind of? Now, this isn't very much, obviously, but like take the company that I was with that day when he was leasing shrimp boats out of Louisiana. Did he have that kind of money available? No. He had what he called funding sources. So he borrowed from, he had several banks lined up who he had already made arrangements with, so he was obtaining financing from them. He called those his funding sources. So most leasing companies will borrow in order to purchase this asset. So a question I'll offer you is, why are we not going to include the cash flows from the funding for this lessor? Right, and I'm going to save the answer to that for our next class period. And I will not just answer it, I will visibly demonstrate why we do not include them. But for right now, just know that we will not include financing cash flows in this analysis for the lessor, even though the lessor is almost completely likely to be borrowing to obtain the asset. All right, so let's come over here. So what was the initial cost? Now we have the depreciation. So we'll do the present value. Factors. Okay. So whereas the lessee had an opportunity cost equal to the depreciation tax yield, this is a genuine expense which the lessor will deduct from taxes. So it's the opposite. The present value will be with a positive cash flow, not a negative one. But let's first of all, this process is identical, except we have to adjust for the. You know what? Before we do that, why don't we just enter a few rows here? And I mean, you don't have to do this, but if you were doing this, what am I doing here? Insert. There we go. If you were working on something like this, you would want to be able to work with different numbers. So you don't want to type in anything. And that's just a general principle of Excel. So let's give the lessor borrowing rate. In fact, you know what? We can get take the word lessor out of this because we know this is all about the lessor. All right, borrowing rate for the lessor, and I think I'm trying to remember. Do I not know? I believe it's 6%. Yeah, 6%. Okay, let's go back and get 6%. So it's a very low borrowing rate compared to the lessee. The tax rate. And that would be 21%. Hey, I just have a conceptual question. Think about this, if you would, please. What if, this is a what if, it's not what we're doing, it's a what if, but what if the lessee and the lessor had exactly the same borrowing and tax rates? Okay. If I had just calculated the NPV of the lease for the lessor, or for the lessee, and the lessor has exactly the same tax rate, the same borrowing rate, what would I know about the NPV of the lease? Well, if that's the case, you are creating an exact mirror image. So positive becomes negative, negative becomes positive, and the numbers are identical. So if they both have the same tax rate, they have the same borrowing rate, then whatever the NPV of the lease for the lessee is, it's the opposite sign for the same amount to the lessor. So they would be identical mirror images. These aren't quite because why? We have different borrowing and tax rates, don't we? Okay, and let's insert another row here, and let's give this one the discount rate. So that would equal the borrowing rate times 1 minus the tax rate. Okay, we should display decimals here. This is actually 4.74%. Okay, there we go. All right, so present value of the factors. So equals NPV, after-tax borrowing rate, comma, and let's go up and get the factors one more time. Now keep in mind, I didn't have to do any of this up here, right? If I'm going to go directly to this method, I would just need to input these factors, wouldn't I? Yeah, that's all you'd have to do. That's why this is so much handier. Okay, so I want the present value, and that's all I need to do here. And let's give it a 4 decimals. Okay, and then the present value of depreciation tax shields would equal, and now keep in mind, this is a positive cash flow to the lessor. So I'm going to flip the sign on the $500 and then times the factors, present value of factors, times the tax rate. All right. And so what does this equal? It would equal $500 times 0.9140 times 21%. You notice I put a space there, right? That's why you can still see this. It didn't calculate it. But you can always go back and make sure that you have it right. And there it is. So I have it right. So what I normally do is I calculate it by hand just to show it to you. And then I'll come in and I'll insert a space here so that I have a literal. So it looks like a label, not a calculation to Excel. All right. All right. Then, now Excel got kind of mean to me here. I thought, did I not put a 0 in there? I think I did. Yeah, but when I calculated, it took it out, of course. But now I've got it back. All right. Then anyway, let's do the net. Okay, it was net savings to the lessee. This becomes, whoop, flip it. Sound effects are free, no extra tuition required. Net cost. So we will add these two together. You know what? I'm going to be a little more clever. So if I get this one first, then I don't have that problem, do I? All right. So what did we have up here? We said that the in order for this lease to be viable for the lessor or lessee, the present value of the lease alternative must be less costly than the present value of the buy option. Well, we're going to work with the same idea here. We want to convert, or we want to, if we are to write this lease, then the present value of these after-tax lease payments has to exceed this net cost. Otherwise, there's no sense in writing this lease. So let's do the present value of the after-tax lease payments. Oh, I guess I skinnied this down too much. All right, here we go. All right, so here we go. Equals present value, rate, and we have that right here. Number of periods, did I put that down? I guess I did. All right, well, anyway, it's 6. And the payment is, actually, we have that up there. We can use that. Hang on, let's not do that. So, number of periods, we've parameterized that. So we have 6. And the payment is 120. Okay. So it's 120, but we said after-tax lease payments. So I'm going to multiply that times 1 minus the tax rate for the lessor. Right, and these are at the beginning of the period, so we'll do our double comma to go around the future value, and then we'll specify a 1 to tell Excel this has to be at the beginning of the period. And now, since we have an embedded parentheses, we have to manually supply the right parentheses. So I have, oh, one other thing. I should have anticipated this. You can anticipate that the present value function will follow Descartes' law. And if you enter a positive lease payment, it'll give you a negative present value. So anticipating that, I should have, I don't know why I didn't, I should have placed a negative sign here, because to the lessor, these payments are positive, but so the present value should also be positive. And there we go. All right, then I take the NPV of this lease. This one plus this one. I get 104.17. All right, one last thing we need to do here, and that would be, let's find the minimum payment that this lessor should be willing to accept. And this will be the break-even point between what it costs the lessor to borrow and purchase the asset, and the lease payment. So the lease payment has to exactly cover the net cost. All right. So if the present value of the after-tax lease payments is 404.03, then it would be just enough to cover the cost of purchasing this asset. And that's after tax, right? Now, you surely don't offer a lease on an your after-tax basis. You offer the lease on your before-tax basis. Hang on a minute, I'm lit up. Let me see what's going on here. For B42, yes, I can. I kind of went up and down, I realize that. So we get our rate, that's the 474. Our number of periods, well, since we'd already written it, it's the same lease, I came up here and got it from here. If you want to type in 6, it would work just as well. And then I wanted the lease payment on an after-tax basis, so I took the lease payment, which I've specified in cell B5, $120, and I multiplied times 1 minus the tax rate for the lessor, and then specified the show at the beginning. Is that okay? All right, looking good. And thank you for the offering your equation. All right, so let's keep going. All right, so let's start out. This part is dedicated to the minimum payment that the lessor should be willing to. All right. So when we conducted this analysis for the lessee, we started with the net savings. This time we'll start with the net cost. Oops, so, well, yeah, I can do that. We'll start with the net cost. We'll copy that across. Okay. Now we'll convert that to a payment. So this would be the lease payment after tax. All right. So we're going to calculate payment, and then the rate. Okay, that would be the discount rate for the lessor. Number of periods, that we will highlight the 6 again. Or you want to type in 6, that would work for today. The present value, and that would be, unfortunately, the cell right above us. To one or the other. All right, comma, no future value. Once again, we want this at the beginning of the period. And without having embedded parentheses, we can simply hit enter now, can't we? All right. Now this is the after-tax lease payment. We need to convert that to a before-tax lease payment. So how do we do it? Well, it's like we've done it several times today. We'll take the after-tax version and divide it by 1 minus the lessor's tax rate. And I show 95.40. So look what happened. the lessor could be willing to go down as far as 95.40. The lessee could go as high as 107.47. So between the two, they should be able to negotiate a lease, shouldn't they? So there is a situation here in which it could be favorable to both. Just to whet your appetite for a little bit of interesting calculations, it will not be that difficult to find the lease payment which provides both parties with the same NPV. We can do that. Not for today, but let me show you some other things you can do here now. But I got a few other things I'd like to show you. Okay, you see here, we found this lease payment. All right, and that's the after-tax payment. So I think you can see. No, we can't. Or can we? Let's see, what do we have here? Let me see what I have here. Yeah, we have a way of, well, anyway. This is the break even for the lessor. All right. Well, what we could have done if you wanted to, can I do this in one step? Well, yes, I can. I can say equals payment. All right. And I know the rate, and I'll just type it in now, but our rate is 4.74%. Number of periods is 6. So I'm on an exam, I'm kind of in a hurry. Okay, the present value. All right. Now, one thing you can do is somewhere along the line, I have to flip this to before tax, right? So this net cost is an after-tax value. So rather than flipping the payment afterwards, I'll just flip the cost. I can do that. So if I click on this and I'll flip it to before tax, I'll divide it by 1 minus the tax rate for the lessor. All right. And then no future value and a 1. And of course, what happens? It doesn't like me. What did I do? Oh, I forgot to print it. Don't ever let Excel fix you. No, get away from me. I hate that nanny. All right, here we go. Do it myself. Oh, look at that. Same 95.40 I have here. The reason I tend to do it this way, all right, is simply because all of our analysis is on an after-tax basis. So I'd rather take the payment that I need on an after-tax payment and on an after-tax basis and then flip it to before tax rather than flip this number before tax. But either way is mathematically equivalent. All right. So either method is mathematically equivalent. Let's see, what else I want to cover today? Yeah, I think that's about it. I will try to answer any last minute questions. Otherwise, let me just show you what's coming up. We have this is our syllabus, and you can see I've changed it. And I think I've done this on the website, so I put the new one up on the website. But actually, I don't think I had to. Yeah, I took May 29th out. Is what I did. May 29th, April 29th. Forgive me. Is out, and the due dates are still the same. All right. So we will still have 2 days to spend on merger analysis. We will we'll finish lease financing on the 22nd of April, and then we will on the 27th, on the 22nd of April, we'll finish lease. On the 27th, we will go over these problems, and that will not take long. And then we will start it on merger analysis. We will conclude merger analysis on the 4th of May. And then on May 6th, we'll have the review. We'll go through these problems and then do a quick review for the final. And then we will have our final exam on Tuesday, the 11th of May, between 3 and 5. That's when I will open the window. All right, so I'll entertain any last moment questions you might have. All right, there we go. What you got going for me, what? So when you're referencing the cell above in the equation, yes, you can. If you remember to do that, you can do it. Yes, very much so. So, Priyank, you want to see the B48? We can do that. Let me look at that one. You know what I could do? Let me do this for you. There you go. So you want the payment, and your arguments are the rate, which we have right above here. You want the number of payments, which I went up above to get. And then what's that next argument? Is the present value. Yep, and the present value was the net cost. And then I specified a beginning of the period annuity. Is that working for you now? Let me come back here. What's going on? Got it. Okay, very good. Thank you. Good. All right. All right. Anything else I can answer? Well, all right then. I will be in touch on Thursday. Oh, I will not. Take that back. No, yeah. This Thursday will. 22nd. Yes. Next Thursday will not. Okay. So let's say goodbye.